So the legs bend. As soon as you bend the legs, you become energetic. This is my experience with students. They don't realize it, but they do. So sinking in order to make a connection with the ground. So normally we're straightening in order to break that connection so that we can release our feet. Here we just bend the legs in order to make a connection. Okay, now let's just start from the beginning. So the head suspended. So that's always the number one, the first instruction, if you like. If you look at the old texts on Tai Chi, the old masters, they would normally list 10 salient points of Tai Chi, and the first one was always head suspended. So that, if you like, is the beginning of the instructions you're giving yourself. So head suspended, followed by sink and relax. And sink and relax, when it's related to the head suspended, it's really just your sacrum behaving like a plum on the end of a plumb knife. So think of your sacrum being very heavy and just hanging down from the suspended head. So your spine is being sort of straightened out a little bit, and it's hanging complete. What they call it plumb erect, don't they, in the classics. And the legs just need to be soft enough so it feels as though you're lowering this sacrum down through them and to the ground. So the sacrum and the skull are just the two ends of the spine, and they're very similar. So we need to develop an awareness, the ability to be aware of your head and your sacrum. So you have to somehow feel them in your mind, you know, to see your body with these two important parts stretching away from each other. Okay, and then what we want the feeling that this area here can move quite freely. So we don't want the legs to be so stiff that they're locking this into stillness. These are just holding the sacrum very gently, and the sacrum has got ease of movement. You know, it can move around, but it can also tip and turn. It can also tilt, roll back, roll forward, so it can gyrate. So let's just move slightly. You're just sort of tipping. You know, you can tip down into this hip and let this hip rise. You're just trying to get the sacrum, some mobility within the sacrum whilst you are hanging from the ceiling. Remember when we were kids, back in the 60s, and at birthday parties there'd be a game where there'd be an apple suspended from the ceiling by a string, and you'd have to hold the hands behind your back and try and bite the apple, try and get your teeth into it. And every time you try to close your mouth, it would push the apple away from you. Yeah? So this apple was very fluid within the space it contained. So it's the same here. I'm hanging down, and this can just move around. Yeah, so it's soft. It's soft. It's got ease of movement. Soft and sexy. Yeah? So a lot of just, you know, you can just roll around. So you want movement on this plane, yeah, and you want movement on this plane, yeah. So like sticking the tail out, pulling the tail under. So when we're still, that movement, the possibility of that movement, its potential is still there. it's become quiet. It's like the water that all the silt has settled out of. If you disturb the water, the silt will rise. So I haven't locked out that movement. It's still there as a possibility rather than as an actuality. So my posture contains, it's a container. My body becomes a container for energy, for potential. Okay. So all the time there's movement here. Yeah? This is just, you can think of your tail. You can think of your tail moving around your little second coccyx, wriggling like a little worm. Okay. And now let's just work exactly the same way, only instead of the sacrum moving around, we want the skull. So the sacrum is now relatively still. So what we've just been doing, this has been still because we think of it suspended, and the sacrum has been moving around. Now just let the sacrum just be still and just let the head move. So it's a little bit like you're drunk, you're a little bit, you have one too many, you know. So the head has just got this freedom of motion. And you don't want it to be a motion that you're introducing, it's a motion that you're becoming aware of, that's already there. And so when we get drunk, that feeling is we're just waking up to movement that is actually there all the time, but we're locking it out to give this impression of sobriety most of the time. And so here we just, so instead of having one too many and trying to pretend you're sober, here we're having none at all and just trying to pretend we're drunk. So we've got this movement. So there's this, so the head is just, it's allowed to do its thing. We're not locking it out. And then just try and feel how they're very much related. So the movements in your head cause movements in your sacrum and vice versa. So the two ends of your spine are like the two hands. They move together. They want to move together. Yeah. And actually the reference point, the still point, is really here, is the dantian. Yeah. And what's below the dantian, even though it's much shorter than what's above it, is just a mirror of what's above it. Yeah. The difficult one is the head, because we tend to keep the head locked because we want to have a clear image of things with our eyes. But here in Tai Chi, we lose the eyes. We don't look, we listen. Yeah? And that listening means not looking. Yeah? If you're looking, then you're not listening. So the head has just got this freedom of motion. And eventually you just become possessed by movement. Yeah? It's there everywhere in every part of you. It's rippling through. Yeah? Okay, now just bring it back and just feel now that is still there, but it's just in the background so much that it doesn't manifest physically. But your energy still has that movement within it. And so it's natural movement. And if it's natural, then it's irregular. It's random, like Brownian motion. Any irregularity is a sign of pathology. It's a sign that something is not right. It's the same with the mind. When I was a kid, madness was indicated by talking to yourself. When you saw someone mumbling away to himself all the time. So by that measure, we're all crazy because we're all talking to ourselves all the time. We just keep it private. Yeah. We create an illusion of sanity. And what makes that talking mad is the fact that it's talking about the same things all the time. It's looping. Yeah. So we don't want looping movement. We don't want this sort of thing. Yeah. It's like it's looking for things it's never done before. It's a very fluid, inquisitive. Okay. And now let's just introduce a little bit of regularity. So just start a gentle bounce, but very gentle, like a little pump, or like you're bouncing a ball on the ground in slow motion. It's coming up and down, but it's very slow. It's lazy slow. Again, just keeping that sacrum heavy. That's it. That's it. This suspended the sacrum. So these movements are helping the spine stretch out. So they're helping the sacrum drop, and they're helping this rise up. There's Yogananda, the sort of yoga teacher, he basically said, when you're meditating, then your spine becomes like a radio antenna. It's transmitting messages and it's receiving messages. And it's not your job, you're just a radio operator. It's not your job to interpret the messages. It's just your job to transmit and receive them. So here there's a sense that, we're just trying to get our antenna, our sensitive instrument aligned properly, loose and capable of transmitting energy from the earth and up through, and of receiving energy down and into the earth. But we're just to go between, what those messages say is not our concern. Our concern is just to serve, to be the transmitter and the receiver. Yeah. Okay. And now let's just start with that same feeling, just easing it. Try and feel like you're standing still, as someone else is moving your body. So someone else is pushing you. So you're using as little muscle as possible to make the movements happen. You're obviously using quite a lot of muscle to keep yourself standing. But it's as though someone is behind you and they're just moving your hips from side to side. And you're just allowing that movement. You're not resisting it, but you're not helping it either. Because the big difficulty really is to keep this feeling like it's hanging down whilst we're using our legs. Because as soon as we start using the legs, it tends to push this up. It tends to hold it tight and push it around. So here we're just trying to use the legs and keep that feeling of this dropping down between them all the time. That's it, that's it. So if someone was standing behind you and was actually doing this for you, then they would have a hand on each hip. So here they would be pushing in this direction, and here they would be pushing in this direction. So what we want to do is feel our legs doing the same thing. So this is why we're in the outside edge of the leg. So here I'm in this outside edge, and it's like the leg comes up and pushes here. It doesn't push underneath, it doesn't push me up. It pushes in this direction. This is why we talk about crocodile legs. The legs come, they enter horizontally, or it feels like they do. So I'm coming up the leg like this, and then I come across. So as I start, the energy coming up is actually coming up, but in that direction a little because of the angle of this shin. And then it comes in and hits me from the side. So I'm holding my sacrum like this so that the tailbone can actually hang down. So that it feels, one way to practice it is just have like a big ball, a football or something between your thighs. Just walk around with a football between your thighs all day. This is what I've got my daughter doing because she's not me. So pushing here. Just feel it getting you into the outside edge of the foot, and then it just squeezes up from there. One. In. And then you naturally have these legs that are grabbing the ground, that are low down. And if you can find someone to work with, then it's just invaluable. Just to be able to feel what it feels like when you let someone else move your body, when you're just standing still and they're responsible for the movement. Because when we move our body, we tend to blot out the passive element of just standing. We want to keep that, so the movement is actually a balance between the active and the passive. It's not the active obliterating the passive. So here, wow. So my movement is in this direction, but my passive element is down, it's on the vertical. So I'm moving here, but I'm still hanging down within that. This is what's difficult. So I'm moving here, but I'm still hanging down. As soon as the mind wanders, this will stiffen up. So you just use your own hands. Yeah? So we want the sacrum to be dropping, which means this pulls in a little bit here. So the last thing we want is the heavy dantian and the tail sticking out. I'm elongating from my tail. My teacher used to say, imagine a kangaroo's tail. Yeah. Those big reds, they can just rest on their tail and kick the one they're boxing with their hind legs. And so the tail can actually be like a pillar of support. So the feeling is you've got this tail dropping down behind you. And you could almost lift up your legs. Okay, coming back to it. Okay, now we just want to turn, but we want to turn, remember in Tai Chi, the unique thing in Tai Chi is what we call yielding, which is this response to energy coming in. So what they say in Tai Chi, there's three possible responses. One is that you fight that response, you block it and try and bang it out. You block the energy coming in, try and knock it out of the way. The other one is that you run away from it. But then there's a middle ground, which we call yielding, where you're neutralizing that energy and then returning it. So basically you introduce a circle. So that energy is coming in tangential to the circle. It just goes around the circle and then comes out tangential to the circle, the other side. Yeah? So this is what Tai Chi has, which most other things don't have. And so what we want to do is make sure that whenever we turn in Tai Chi, we're yielding. Yeah? So the turn is part of joining with another energy. So let's just feel here. So this is the part that we yield. Yeah? So when you're yielding to somebody, it looks like it's the hand that's yielding because you're doing this, but it's actually here. Yeah? This is the point in your waist, if you like, and you're close to your down chest. So you just break here and just let yourself turn. And again, just imagine someone else is doing it for you. So someone else just, it's very sensitive, these parts. And if someone puts their finger there, you'll really feel it, yeah? And so they press, and you just let it bend. You just let the joint fold, and you come more into this leg. And then you just return. So this is what we're looking at, really, is the return. I want to turn, but I want to bounce out of that and return. Yeah, so I'm here, and then here. Yeah. So this joint here is like a circle. So I'm coming in, around it, and then out. And as I come in, I'm sinking, I'm dropping down. And as I come out, I'm rising. So as I'm sinking, this hip is dropping a little bit. So there's a sense of almost leaning over. And then when you come out, it rolls the other way. Yeah, that's it. So when you turn this way, it's like you're trying to get out of the way, but without moving your body out of the way. You're making a hole. You're making a hollow here for the other person to come through. And then you're just throwing them out by reversing the hollow. So I turn this way, and then I reverse it. And it's all coming from this leg. So don't worry about cross energy. So just, this is taking me completely into this leg. And then this is beginning to bring me into this leg. So I'm turning. Make sure you sink. It's the sinking that will soften it. So here it's like relaxing the sacrum down. It's the same feeling. We're just doing it on the turn. So here, so it's that feeling of melting away from the other person or with them, if you like. You're melting in order to draw them in, not in order to get away from them, but to actually suck them into this hole. And then you just return the energy. So you're just basically just making a circle. But you're thinking of the circle in terms of turning and returning. So we're wanting our turning not to be mechanical, but to be a response to a living creature. It's a living response. It's not just a mechanical action that I'm imposing upon my body. I really visualize that energy coming in and I just have to yield to it. But we're not allowed the luxury of getting out of the way. We've got to stay with it, stay in this leg. And so yielding like this is not yielding. That's what we call avoidance. That's more like the bullfighter. The bullfighter can't stop thinking about yielding because that bull is so damn heavy. So here, you're not just turning yourself, you see, you're turning the other person. So as they're coming in, your turning turns them. So if they're coming in like this, suddenly they feel this happening. They're being turned back on themselves, and you're just following it. In a sense, you're forcing them to do something that you follow. You introduce something that they're not expecting, which is a hold. And then you just follow their response to that hold. And wow. They will now start drawing out, so you follow them. But, and back out. And all the time in the background, keeping the sacrum heavy. So just try and make sure that the movements are coming from the hip rather than from the hand. The hip is moving the hand, not the other way around. It's my hip that's sinking and turning. So there's a slight lag. The hand is always the last thing to move. It always lags behind everything else. So one. And we're just trying to extend the range. So just try and turn as much as you can. Yeah, so what keeps us locked up is the fact that we are frightened of extremes. So a lot of the work is like yoga, what yoga should be is just like becoming familiar with those extremes of extension. So here, what's the furthest I can turn? Yeah. And I just want to be familiar with that place so that I'm no longer frightened of it. Because if I'm frightened of that extreme, then as soon as I start turning, that fear is already being produced and it's wanting to throw me back. So I don't want that. I want to be thrown back because I've hit an elastic limit rather than because I've hit fear. So I turn. I can just keep going. You know? This is hanging down. And then there's a point where it's springy. When you reach that limit, that edge, it's got a bounce to it, and then you just use that bounce to return. So the return is because of my body, not because of my mind. Not because my mind has got frightened or has made a decision. So what's the furthest you can go? And then it will just return. And now let's try this side. So turning here and keeping the sacrum heavy. So what happens is the legs tend to get stiff. They tend to start working in a hard way. So you have to tell yourself, okay, sacrum hanging all the time to keep the legs soft. So the legs are sort of accommodating the movement rather than producing it. So I turn because something here is giving, and then I return because I've bounced off the wall. Turn, can't turn anymore, so I have to go back because I have momentum. See why? So the movement just flows and that. Now let's just try it one at a time. So here and here, and then here. So all the time that sacrum hanging down in the middle. Yeah, so you're turning, you're just turning one side and then the other, but you're turning because you're yielding, not because you're just introduced a mechanical repetitive motion. Here I'm softening. Here I'm softening. I'm softening. And the return takes you by surprise. It takes the other by surprise, certainly. But it also takes you by surprise. Ooh, what's happening here? And so just visualize that push coming in that you're dealing with. And so it's the other person's energy that makes all this happen. And so you're not volunteering a response. The response is drawn out of you by the intention and the energy of the other person. So they start pushing and you just go with it. This is what's difficult when you're working with another person, to make it true rather than simply an anticipatory response. All the time the sacrum hanging down. Right. And then I just practice here. So again, it's head suspended, sacrum heavy. Now let's just try a little bit of this, just the same feeling. So you're turning because you're yielding in the hip. So the hip is giving, and the hip is returning, the hip is giving. That's it, that's it. So it's got this feeling that you're sort of dipping down into each leg as you turn, and then come back up as you return. So basically one leg is bending, the other one is straightening, so there's a sense of leaning over a little bit. So this is pretty much central, and it stays central. So your head is tipping. So just keep your attention here. Try to ignore what's happening in the arms. And just let the head sway. Head suspended, safe and heavy, and then you can't go wrong with it. Yeah, just feel it. Just really enjoy the feeling. It's like you're being swaddled in silks. Yeah, it's like there's just this energy is just swirling around you. And then just back to it. And again, sacrum hanging. Yeah, so you want to feel that the sacrum is, there's a feeling that your buttocks are drooping down into your backs of your legs. Like the backs of your legs are just beginning to melt downwards. And the front of your legs are actually coming up. So the rising energy is coming up the front, and the sinking energy is going down your spine and down the backs of your legs. Yeah? So there's this circuit. So I'm sinking down the back. And the sinking down into my heels actually produces the upward. Because if I'm sinking and I'm not moving, then I must be sending something up as well, otherwise I feel imbalanced. Yeah? So the heavy sacrum is actually dropping down the backs of the legs. So my sinking is behind me, and my rising is in front of me. John used to call it the sea of fire. So your sinking actually produces this rising fire that comes out of the ground in front of you, simply by virtue of the fact that your sinking is relaxing down and into the ground. And that rising, so it's like it's lifting a veil. The veil is being lifted from your being, and you can now make a real connection. Because that barrier that you put up has been lifted by this rising energy from the ground. And that all comes from the sacrum just hanging down. And my legs just being able to let it through. Now let's just work. Just up and out. That's it. So that should really open the chest. And then up and down. So just be aware that when we're working the upper body like this, we're working it to help it open up so that we can sink even better. So the more open you are here, the more the sacrum should be inclined to drop. So the last thing we want is to be coming out of our root. Everything that we do takes us deeper into the breath, even rising. So now this is really coming down. Then heavy sacrum. Heavy sacrum. And so your thoracic spine is becoming gradually a little bit straighter with each lift. And consequently, so is your lumbar spine, because the curvature in the thoracic spine is just a mirror of the curvature in your lumbar spine. And it's all helping the skull and the sacrum separate more and more. So it's like we're trying to introduce a little bit of air between each vertebra, so that the spine can transmit energy. Energy can pass through the spine. I once read a book about anatomy, and they said that the greatest engineering feat in nature is the human spine, because it is so conductive of energy. It can allow ripples to pass through it on like any plane, not just this one. So it's not just this. It's got all these possibilities at its disposal. So the spine just wriggles. The spine is wriggling all the time in response to what's trying to burst out of you and in response to what's coming into you. And so like a racehorse, or like an animal that's really sensitive. Okay, now let's just take it up and out, releasing the sacrum here, and then just bring it forwards. But we want to bring it forwards by, again, yielding. So I'm not just doing a mechanical movement like this. The arms are coming in because I'm accepting something into this space. I'm yielding my shoulders. So from here, it's like I turn a little bit this way to yield this arm. And then I turn a little bit this way to yield this arm. And then it starts the hands coming together. And then they naturally come in. So up, heavy sacrum, out. And then just yield. Imagine something coming in, and you just got to yield each side. Exactly the same as when we were doing the hips here. And that's bringing the arms in to an embrace, which you then close. So up, out, up, and whoa. That's it, that's it. It's like you're hugging someone. Yeah. And sacrum, and just ooh. And sacrum, and now just, how does this hand come in? It comes in, one way they explain it is like the tips of the fingers are leading. So rather than doing this, where my palms are leading, so the direction is coming out of my palm when I do this, it's more coming out of the fingertips. Yeah? So it's like I have arrows coming out of my fingertips, and that's actually the direction and the vector, if you like, the energy, the flow. This is exactly the same as when you hug someone. So when you hug someone, you don't do this, otherwise you'll hit them with these parts. You actually envelop them, you send your hands behind them, and your fingers are moving towards each other. And then that space then becomes like a negative space, it sucks. And so you just allow it to suck your own hands in. So you end up embracing. So it feels like the elbows are continuing the circle, but the hands are just folded in. And then up. Heavy sacrum, out, and again. Fingertips leading. So the energy is coming out of the fingers, not out of the hand. And then you just let that fold in softly. And now here, just feel the prayer posture. So the elbows are heavy. The elbows are allied with your sacrum. So it's all part of the same thing. So the elbows are being pulled down by gravity. But that pull of the elbow is actually squeezing your fingers upwards. So there's a lift from your fingertips, but a drop from your elbows. This is the power of prayer posture. It connects instantly with this vertical that's running through you, that's connecting you from the earth to the heavens. And then up. And we say from the should really release your sacrum as you go over the top there. And then fingertips leading, creating a soft space in this circle that you're producing, which then just draws your hands in. And instantly, as soon as you make this shape, you've got zoom. You just become more aware of that. Just try it up. Now, heavy sacrum. And roll. So yielding is all about making a tender space for the other person to come into. So the ultimate yielder would be the mother holding the infant there. So that space that she's creating is just pure love. And so the infant can just be nourished, and be nurtured from that place. So this is the feeling of yielding. You're just creating a tender space for the other person to fall into. So when we reach up, we just think about when you were a little baby. What's the first thing you saw when you looked up? It was the mother's face, the smile of the mother. So the smile of the mother is beaming down at you. So it's not the father, it's not God the Father, it's not his lordship, it's the mother. So that's what we're connecting to when we look up. The father is like a theory, it's something in the background. It just goes out and earns a living. The real connection is with the mother's smile and the mother's breast. So you're looking up. So here you're just reaching up and connecting, opening up to that smile that's beaming down on you. And then here you're becoming the mother yourself. You're just containing that space and bringing it in. Remember the Teletubbies? It's probably a program I've watched more than any other. But the sun was actually a child's face smiling. It's beautiful. Yeah? You can find inspiration anywhere. So here you're just looking up at that smile and feeling it beaming down into you. And then here you're just containing it. Yeah. So this is what we're sort of working on, really, is trying to make the simplest of exercises very rich in imagery. Because it's what you're doing with your mind that's important, not what you're doing with your body. And so you could be doing this and it could be completely mechanical, and you could be thinking about something completely unrelated, and it will be doing you no good whatsoever on an energetic level. It may keep you slightly fit. But what we're trying to do is just really connect with the symbology, if you like, the symbolism inside the exercise, and let it really resonate with our internal. And for that, you need to work as far back as possible. When you were a child, when you were a baby, when you were in the room, they're all times that we never forget. They're with us forever. And what's interesting about the old people I work with is that they don't remember what happened yesterday, but they remember what happened when they were like 3 years old, like it was yesterday. So the older we get, the closer that past, that deep past becomes to us. Heavy sacrum, so all the time, just telling yourself, heavy sacrum, tender space. If I was doing this with John, by this point, after this length of time, tears would be streaming down his face. Heavy sacrum, open chest, really open it, and then envelop it. You're trying to envelop as large a space as possible. So that just keeps you really tender and open. And then you just bring part of yourself into that space. Heavy sacrum. So by repeating an exercise, it takes you places. Yeah. So you end up going places you've never been before with your energy. And then one more. Up. And then just down. Maybe so from. Okay, now let's just work this a little bit. Pulling it in, pushing it out, but very, very gentle. Again, almost like it's someone else that's doing it. So what we're wanting is that every action that we do is a response to the other. So just imagine someone's just putting their hand on your belly and you just yield the belly. You just draw it in to accept that hand. And then it has to go somewhere and it can't go any further in, so it has to bounce out. And then again, another hand on your belly. Another couple. So pulling it in, very easy and gentle. Yeah, but it can become quite extreme. It doesn't. We just want things to start off really gently, and then it can really go to the limit you want. So here it's almost involuntary, and then here as well. And again, just back to here. Okay, now let's just try, I want to just start building up a bit of the white crunchy film that we used to do. So let's just stand in. So the stance is about 1.5 shoulder widths, and the toes are pointing in. Not a lot, but enough, yeah? So feel how that, just as soon as your toes point slightly in, it just stretches across the sacrum a little bit, across here. Yeah. Okay, now the difficulty of this sequence is not the movements, but the stance. Yeah? It's how do you stand? Because we want the legs to be straight, but bending, or bending but straight. So the feeling is that the backs of the legs are trying to bend me, but the front of my legs is trying to straighten through that. So the backs of the legs are actually tightening a little bit and trying to pull me down, but the front of the legs are pushing up through that. So what it means is that your bum very much stays in. So if you're releasing here, then this will tend to happen. You see these are now straightening. I want the feeling that my hamstrings are tightening a little bit, balancing the tightness here, which is keeping me up. So these are pushing up through the body, and the hamstrings are actually pulling me down to the ground. So ostensibly my legs are straight, but they're straight in a very different way from normal. Because normally when they're straight, they're wanting to move around. Here we're very much planting. We're very much in our reach. Okay, so now just The arms are out to the sides. The arms are quite straight and the fingers are quite straight. Yeah. And just feel the tension. So what they'll do is just let themselves fill with energy a little bit. And now just bring the arms up in front of you, keeping them straight, but keeping the shoulders really relaxed. So if you relax your shoulders, then as you bring the arms up, it will feel like they're getting longer and longer. And that's simply because you're issuing energy from the fingers. So you're firing energy out from the fingers simply by virtue of the fact that you've lifted your arms and you've kept the shoulders down. Okay, now let's just bring them down again. Again, the legs straightening, but bending at the same time. Bending to maintain a root, straightening to bring energy up into the body. And now again, I'm just bringing my arms up, but I'm keeping the shoulders really relaxed. So the fingers will just extend naturally because of the energy that's coming out of them. And now just pull the hands back, but keep the shoulders really relaxed. So if your shoulders are relaxed, then it will really pull the tendons underneath your arms. It will be quite sort of painful in a sort of yoga stretching sort of way. Sacrum heavy, hanging down, head suspended from the ceiling, bending the legs but straightening through them. And now just reverse it, so the fingers forwards and then down. Okay, so again, up, relax shoulders, and then the fingers will really fire energy out. And now just pull the fingers back. So now the energy is coming out of the palm, the middle of the palm, down the arm. Okay, now what we do now, we work the shoulder blades. So we basically do, so at the moment the shoulder blades are really pushed apart. To get the hands as far out as possible. Now I just pull the shoulder blades towards each other and just let the fingers drop and then out again. Okay. So when you see someone doing it, what you see is their hands moving, but it's not coming from there. It's coming from the action of the shoulder blades pulling together and then pushing apart. What's happening in the hands is just not really important. Pull the shoulder blades together and push apart. And then down. Okay, now let's try again. I'll stand this way so you get a different view. Okay. So again, just bringing the arms up, keep the shoulders really relaxed. And palms forwards. Let the energy beam out. You need a mind that can extend beyond your own body. And now I just work here. I'm pulling my shoulder blades together from the back. And that flattens my hands out, but just a little bit. See, they haven't come in very far. And then I just push them out again by pushing the shoulder blades apart. So I'm working the upper back to actually make this action. It's not coming from the hands. So I'm rolling in. Out. And it just picks up a rhythm. It gets like a ripply rhythm. So 1, 2, 4, push, pull, push, pull, push, pull. From the back and down. Okay. So now let's try again. And then you just do the same thing with the hands out to the side. So I'll show you. So just up, relaxed, legs bending but straightening at the same time. Relax shoulders, fingers up. Okay, now we do 3 of these. Yeah. So pulling the shoulder blades together, just flattens the hands out, and then pushing the shoulder blades apart. Pulling them together, pushing them apart. Together, and apart. That's 3. And now you just drop the fingers down, again, energy beaming out the fingers, and now just bring the arms out to the side. Again, keeping the shoulders really relaxed. So it feels like something is falling from here down the arms because of my relaxed shoulders. And then again, just pulling the fingers so they're upright. That's it. Yeah. Keeping the legs straightening through this sinking body. So in other words, sacrum heavy. And just feel the tendons under the arms, they really pull. And now again, from the shoulder blades, pull the shoulder blades together and then squeeze them apart. Pull them together and apart. Pulling the shoulder blades together. It's quite difficult, you know, it takes a lot of practice to get the mobility required in the shoulders. So pull, push, pull, push, pull, push, pull, push. So again, you do 3 of those, and then you just bring it back down again. Okay, now let's just do another. There's a bit now that we'll miss out for the time being, because I just want to do this next bit because it's important. So just bring the hands up, and both palms looking at the top of your head. Yeah. Again, sacrum heavy, legs straightening through the bending. So you become almost statuesque. Yeah. And then link the fingers together and turn the palms to face up and push upwards. Okay, now there's another bit now that we'll miss out. I just want to do this next stretch. So now just bending from the hips and just tip over and just hang down. Keeping the legs straight. So this is really stretching the hamstrings. It's the most important stretch. If you've only got time to do one stretch, stretch the hamstrings. And just hang. You're hanging until the palms are flat on the floor and the legs are straight. And then once you're down, just turn a little bit to the left and move the hands towards the left foot. And then back to the front, and then towards the right foot, keeping the legs straight. Yeah, so we're just preferentially stretching the leg we're turning towards. Back to the front, the side, back to the front, the side, back to the front, side. So each time you turn, you get a little deeper. All the time you're trying to keep the legs straight. As we get older, it's more difficult to keep the legs straight, to straighten the legs. And then back to the middle, really straighten the legs, palms on the floor. And then just bend the legs to sink the sacrum down. Like you're going down into a squat, and then just lift up. So lift the head, and then bring yourself up. So just basically coming up from the legs rather than from the back. Okay. So we're just stretching the backs of the legs. In a way, it's the most horrible stretch because it's the most painful, but it's also the most important.